The council chamber floated in the darkness of space, a massive ring station where the most powerful species in the galaxy gathered to decide the fate of worlds. Today, the air inside carried the weight of fear. Councillor Vex Ithari sat in his seat, his four eyes fixed on the holographic display at the center of the chamber. The elderly Koran had witnessed 300 years of galactic politics, had seen empires rise and fall, had negotiated peace between species that had warred for millennia. But nothing in his long life had prepared him for what he was watching now. The footage showed a battlefield on Colony World Epsilon 7. The Zathran Collective had attacked 6 months ago, confident in their victory. The Zathran were not a species to be taken lightly. Their shock troops had conquered 17 different civilizations. Their warriors stood 9 feet tall, with armored hide that could deflect energy weapons. They had crushed every military force they had ever faced, until they met humans. Vex Ithari watched as human soldiers in simple armor charged across open ground toward Zathran positions. The other counselors muttered in disbelief. No sane species charged toward enemy fire. The accepted doctrine throughout the galaxy was simple. Maintain distance, use cover, preserve your forces, retreat when necessary. War was a calculated affair of positioning and resources. Humans had apparently never received that memo. The footage continued. Human soldiers moved in small groups, coordinating their movements with precision. When one group drew fire, another flanked. When Zathran warriors charged, humans didn't retreat. They advanced to meet them. Close-quarters combat was considered barbaric by galactic standards, something primitive species did before they developed proper military doctrine. Humans excelled at it. A human soldier, no larger than an average Zathran's torso, tackled one of the massive aliens. The human's weapon had been destroyed, so he used his fists, his knees, anything he could. The Zathran warrior was stronger, but the human was faster, more aggressive, absolutely relentless. When other Zathran moved to help their comrade, human snipers dropped them from positions the Zathran hadn't even known existed. The battle ended with the Zathran in full retreat. The species that had conquered 17 civilizations had been routed by what humans called their regular infantry, not elite forces, not specially trained warriors, just regular soldiers. This is madness, Ambassador Krill of the Nexian Empire said, his crystalline form pulsing with agitation. These humans fight like they have no regard for their own survival. They fight like they have no regard for impossible odds, Vex Ithari corrected quietly. Watch the next segment. The hologram shifted to show another battle, this time a space engagement. A human destroyer, the UNSC Relentless, faced off against 3 Zathran heavy cruisers. By all tactical assessments, the human ship should have retreated immediately. Instead, it accelerated toward the enemy vessels. The human ship was smaller, less armored, but it moved with aggressive precision. It closed the distance before the Zathran could bring their heavy weapons to bear effectively, then unleashed a devastating barrage at point-blank range. When one Zathran cruiser attempted to ram the human vessel, the Relentless simply rolled aside and fired its weapons into the enemy's exposed engines. Within 20 minutes, all 3 Zathran cruisers were disabled or destroyed. The Relentless had sustained damage but remained operational. They're too aggressive, Ambassador Krill insisted. Their tactics are reckless. They'll burn themselves out. 6 months, Vex Ithari said softly. The war lasted 6 months. The Zathran had never lost a war in less than 10 years. Usually, their conquest took decades. The humans ended it in 6 months. He paused, letting that sink in, and according to their own military reports, they classify this as a minor conflict. The chamber fell silent. The vote, Vex Ithari continued, is whether to accept humanity's application for Galactic Council membership. I have spent the last month studying everything I can about these newcomers. I've read their history, their literature, their military doctrine. I've spoken with their diplomats and their soldiers. He looked around at his fellow counselors. I believe we have 2 choices. We can welcome them as allies, or we can ensure they become our enemies. There is no middle ground with humans. You speak as though we should fear them. A counselor from the Althean Harmony said, I speak as someone who has watched footage of their regular military. Forces doing what our best warriors could not. Vex Ithari replied. And that terrifies me because if these are their regulars, what are their elite forces like? The vote was called. It passed narrowly. Humanity would be welcomed into the Galactic Council. Several counselors looked relieved. Others looked nervous. Vexathari simply felt tired. As the council session ended, his assistant approached. "Counselor, there's an urgent message. A science vessel from our homeworld is under attack by pirates in the Kepler reaches. They're requesting assistance." Vexathari's heart sank. The Kepler reaches were far from any Koran military assets. Their science ship would be destroyed before help could arrive. "How many pirate vessels?" 12, sir. The usual raiders from the Broken Ring Syndicate." Vexathari closed his eyes. 12 ships. The science vessel carried 200 researchers and their families. Send a distress call on all frequencies. Perhaps someone nearby can— "Sir, we're receiving a response. The human ship Relentless is in the sector. Captain Sarah Chen says they're already moving to intercept." "One ship?" Vexathari felt his hope fading. "Against 12 pirates?" His assistant looked confused by his tone. "Sir, Captain Chen seemed very confident. She said, and I quote, 'We'll have your people safe within the hour.'" Vexathari accessed the communication channel to the Relentless. The view screen showed a human woman in a dark blue uniform, sitting in a command chair. She looked young by human standards, perhaps 40 years old, but her eyes held the confidence of a veteran warrior. "Captain Chen," Vexathari said, "I appreciate your willingness to help, but 12 pirate vessels will be dealt with." "Counselor," Captain Chen interrupted politely but firmly, "we've handled worse. The Relentless is already at combat speed. We'll reach your people in 30 minutes. Captain, I watched footage of your vessel fighting Zathran cruisers. These pirates are different. They fight dirty, use hostages, set traps." Captain Chen smiled, and Vexathari felt a chill run through him. It wasn't a cruel smile, but it carried absolute certainty. "Counselor, with respect, we just finished a war against an empire that had conquered 17 species. A dozen pirates and outdated ships don't concern me." She leaned forward slightly. "Besides, these are just regulars you're talking to. We haven't even needed to call in the special forces." The screen went dark as Chen cut the connection to focus on her mission. Vexathari stared at the empty screen. His assistant shifted nervously beside him. "Sir, should we send additional ships?" "No," Vexathari said slowly. He pulled up a tactical display showing the Kepler reaches. The Relentless was already moving at speeds that would strain most military vessels. "No, I don't think we need to. But I want full sensor coverage of that engagement. I want to see exactly what human regulars can do." His assistant nodded and hurried away. Vexathari sat alone in his office, watching the tactical display. A single human ship racing toward 12 pirate vessels. The odds were terrible by any conventional assessment. But then humans didn't seem to care much about conventional assessments. He thought about Captain Chen's words. Just regulars. If one regular human ship could handle 12 pirates without concern, if regular human soldiers could defeat the Zathran shock troops, then what could their elite forces accomplish? It was a question Vexathari wasn't sure he wanted answered, but something told him that before long the galaxy would find out anyway. The rescue took 43 minutes. Vexathari watched from his office as the Relentless dropped out of faster-than-light travel right in the middle of the pirate formation. The tactical display lit up with weapon fire, but the human ship moved like nothing the counselor had ever seen. It wasn't just fast. It was precise, aggressive, and utterly unpredictable. The pirates tried to scatter, but the Relentless had already calculated their likely escape vectors. One by one, the human ship disabled their engines with surgical precision. When 3 pirate vessels tried to use the Koran science ship as a shield, the Relentless launched boarding pods, in the middle of a space battle. Vexathari watched in disbelief as human soldiers in armored suits breached the pirate vessels and secured them from the inside. The pirates were experienced raiders who had terrorized shipping lanes for decades. They lasted less than 10 minutes against the human boarding teams. The entire engagement was over in 43 minutes. All 200 Koran researchers were safe. The pirates were captured, their ships secured. The Relentless hadn't even sustained significant damage. Vexathari immediately made arrangements to travel to the Kepler reaches. He needed to understand these humans better. He needed to see for himself what made them so different from every other species in the galaxy. 3 days later, he stood in the docking bay of the Relentless, watching as Captain Chen approached to greet him. She was smaller than he expected, maybe 5.5 feet tall in human measurements, but she moved with confident authority. Her crew clearly respected her. Counselor Vexithari, Chen said, extending her hand in the human gesture of greeting. Welcome aboard the Relentless. I hope your journey was comfortable. Vexithari grasped her hand gently with one of his own four-fingered hands. Captain Chen, thank you for saving our people. I came to thank you personally, and to ask if I might tour your vessel. I'm trying to understand humanity better, Chen smiled. Of course. Though I should warn you, the Relentless isn't anything special by our standards. She's just a standard destroyer. We have over 200 ships in this class. Just a standard destroyer. Vexithari tried to imagine 200 ships like this operating together and felt slightly dizzy. The tour began in the ship's bridge. It was smaller than equivalent spaces on other species' vessels, with stations packed close together. The crew worked with quick efficiency, calling out reports and updates in rapid succession. There was a controlled energy to the place, like a predator ready to pounce. Your crew seems very focused, Vexithari observed. We train constantly, Chen explained. Every member of this crew can perform at least 3 different jobs. If someone goes down, someone else takes their place immediately. We call it redundancy. The mission comes first always. They moved through the ship and Vexithari began to notice patterns. Everything was designed for efficiency and survivability. There were no large open spaces that could be compromised by a single hull breach. Emergency supplies were everywhere. The crew quarters were small but functional. This wasn't a ship built for comfort. It was built for war. I'd like to show you our Marine contingent, Chen said, leading him to the training deck. Since you mentioned wanting to understand us better. The training deck was a large space filled with equipment that looked designed to cause pain. Human soldiers in physical training gear were running, lifting weights and practicing combat techniques. But what caught Vexithari's attention was the gravity indicator on the wall. Is that reading correct? He asked. You're training at 1.4 times Earth gravity? Standard practice, a Marine sergeant said, walking over. He was a tall, heavily muscled human who introduced himself as Sergeant Marcus Rodriguez. We train heavy so combat feels light. Captain, permission to continue the drill? Granted, Chen said. Vexithari watched as a group of Marines began a training exercise that would have killed soldiers from most species. They wore full combat gear, carrying weapons and equipment that must have weighed nearly 100 pounds combined. Then they ran an obstacle course that included climbing walls, crawling through narrow tunnels, and engaging pop-up targets with live ammunition. The entire time, they communicated with hand signals and short-clipped phrases. They moved as a unit, covering each other, advancing in coordinated rushes. When one Marine stumbled, 2 others were immediately there to help while maintaining their defensive positions. How long do they train like this? Vexithari asked. Every day, Chen replied. 2 hours of physical conditioning, 2 hours of combat drills, 2 hours of technical training, and 1 hour of tactical studies. Minimum. Every day? Vexithari couldn't hide his shock. That seems excessive. Sergeant Rodriguez overheard and grinned. Sir, with respect, that's just to maintain readiness. Before we get assigned to a ship, we go through 6 months of basic training, then another 6 months of specialized training. Then we train some more. We have a saying, the more you sweat in training, the less you bleed in combat. Vexithari thought about the Corps and military. Their soldiers trained for 3 months before assignment, then maintained skills with weekly drills. What these humans considered normal would be seen as brutal and excessive by galactic standards. Your Marines are clearly elite soldiers, Vexithari said. Chen and Rodriguez exchanged glances, and both smiled. It was that same confident smile Chen had shown before, the one that made Vexithari nervous. Counselor, Chen said gently, these are regular Marines, standard infantry. They're well-trained, absolutely, but they're not elite. They're the baseline. Vexithari felt his respiratory system falter for a moment. The baseline? Every human military organization has special forces, Chen explained. She led him to her office and pulled up files on her computer. Units like the Navy SEALs, Delta Force, Army Rangers, Special Air Service, Spetsnaz, and dozens of others. Operators who go through years of additional training for special missions. What kind of missions? Vexithari asked, though part of him wasn't sure he wanted to know. Chen's expression became more serious. The missions no one else can do. Hostage rescue in hostile territory. Elimination of high-value targets. Infiltration and sabotage behind enemy lines. Strategic reconnaissance. Our special forces operators are trained to work in small teams, often without support, in the worst conditions imaginable. She pulled up a classified file. I need your word that what I'm about to show you stays between us for now. The Galactic Council will be briefed eventually, but this footage is still classified. You have my word, Vexthari said solemnly. The footage showed a facility on Titan, one of Saturn's moons. According to the briefing text, a terrorist cell had taken over a mining facility and captured 200 hostages. They threatened to execute the hostages and destroy the facility's fusion reactor, which would have contaminated a large portion of Titan's surface. The local authorities had attempted negotiation for 6 days. Then they called in Earth's special forces. Vexthari watched as 6 human operators, just 6, infiltrated the facility. They moved through the complex like ghosts, neutralizing guards without raising alarms. They accessed the facility's security systems, mapped the location of every terrorist and hostage, then executed their assault with perfect synchronization. The entire operation took 40 minutes. All 200 hostages were extracted safely. The fusion reactor was secured. The terrorists were either captured or killed. The 6 operators had no casualties. 6 soldiers, Vexthari whispered. 6 soldiers did what should have required a battalion. That's why we call them special forces, Chen said. They're trained to do the impossible. They're taught that failure isn't an option, that obstacles are just problems to solve, and that if something hasn't been done before, they'll be the first to do it. Vexthari sat back in his chair, his 4 eyes blinking in different patterns as his mind processed what he'd learned. Captain, I have a difficult question. If your regular forces are this capable, and your special forces are even more capable, then why haven't humans conquered the galaxy? Chen was quiet for a moment. Because we don't want to, Counselor. We fight when we have to, defend what's ours and help those who need it. But conquest? Building an empire? That's not who we are. We learned a long time ago that the strongest military doesn't give you the right to rule others. It was, Vexthari realized, the most terrifying thing she could have said. A species this militarily powerful that didn't seek conquest was unprecedented. It meant humans truly believed in their principles. It also meant they would be loyal allies but absolutely devastating enemies. I'm returning to the Council, Vexthari said. I'm going to recommend full military alliance with humanity. I want your people as friends, Captain Chen. Because after seeing what I've seen today, I never want to face you as enemies. Chen nodded. We'd like that too, Counselor. The galaxy seems like a dangerous place. We'd rather face those dangers together. After Vexthari left, Chen stood on the bridge of the Relentless looking out at the stars. Her tactical officer approached quietly. Captain, do you think we scared him? Chen smiled slightly. I think we gave him a realistic view of human capabilities. He needed to understand what we bring to the table. And if the Council rejects us? Then they reject us, Chen said simply. But at least they'll do it with their eyes open. Better they understand now what humans are capable. The emergency session of the Galactic Council was the most somber gathering Vexthari had witnessed in his 3 centuries of service. The holographic display at the center of the chamber showed images that made even the most hardened military commanders look away. The Ilithani homeworld burned, not with the fires of warfare, but with the slow, systematic destruction of a culture. The Catharan Dominion didn't just conquer worlds. They broke them, reshaped them, erased what came before. 72 hours, Ambassador Krill said, his crystalline form dimmed with sorrow. The Ilithani defenses fell in 72 hours. The Catharan used biological weapons, sonic disruptors, and overwhelming force. 3 billion Ilithani are now under occupation. The display shifted to show a massive fortress in the heart of the Ilithani capital city. It was a structure of brutal efficiency, all sharp angles and dark metal, completely unlike the flowing artistic architecture the Ilithani had built. The Catharan have imprisoned 2,000 Ilithani in this fortress, Vexthari said, taking over the briefing. Scientists, artists, teachers, leaders, the best minds of their civilization. According to intelligence reports, the Catharan plan to either break them into serving the Dominion or execute them as examples. What are our options? Asked the Supreme Commander of the Althean Harmony Fleet, a being of pure energy contained in a crystalline matrix. Fleet Admiral Korath of the Nexian Empire pulled up tactical data. The fortress is protected by quantum shielding that prevents orbital bombardment. It's surrounded by 50,000 Catharan ground forces. The entire planet is covered by surface-to-space defensive cannons that would destroy any fleet we send. Any rescue attempt would require us to fight through the planetary defenses, land-ground forces, assault a fortified position against overwhelming odds, extract 2,000 hostages, and escape before Catharon reinforcements arrive. The chamber was silent as the implications sank in. It's impossible, Korath continued. I've run simulations. Even if we committed our entire fleet, casualties would exceed 70% and we'd likely fail to rescue the hostages. The Catharan would execute them the moment they detected our assault. So we abandon them? Vexithari asked quietly. We leave 2,000 innocent beings to die or worse. We prepare for a long campaign, Korath replied. We gather our forces, cut off Catharan supply lines, isolate the system, and eventually liberate it. In 2, maybe 3 years, the hostages will be dead in 2 months, Vexithari interrupted. The Catharan don't keep prisoners long. You know this. The council chamber filled with uncomfortable silence. Every being present knew Vexithari was right. They also knew that any rescue attempt would be suicide. Vexithari made a decision. He opened a communication channel on his personal device, one that bypassed council protocols. Within moments, he was connected to Earth's United Nations Space Command headquarters. Admiral Marcus Webb appeared on the screen. He was an older human with gray hair and sharp eyes that had seen decades of warfare. Counselor Vexithari, I assume this isn't a social call. Admiral, I'm sending you tactical data on a situation. I need to know if you can help. Vexithari transmitted the files on the Ilithani hostages, the fortress, the Catharan defenses, everything. Webb studied the data for several minutes. Vexithari could see other human officers gathering behind the Admiral, reviewing the information on their own screens. The humans talked among themselves in low voices, pointing at data, running calculations. Finally, Webb looked back at the camera. 2,000 hostages, fortress with quantum shielding and advanced security, 50,000 enemy troops in the region, surface-to-space cannons preventing orbital support. He paused. Counselor, you understand what you're asking? I'm asking if it's possible, Vexithari said. Your Captain Chen told me that humans have special forces trained for impossible missions. This is an impossible mission. Webb glanced at something off-screen, then back at Vexithari. We'll need 48 hours for mission planning. This is a job for JSOC. JSOC? Vexithari asked. Joint Special Operations Command, Webb explained. The best of the best from all our Special Forces units. If this mission can be done, they're the ones who can do it. Admiral, the Galactic Council's best military minds have declared this impossible. Webb's expression didn't change. Counselor, with all due respect to the Galactic Council, they're not human special forces. We'll send you our mission plan within 48 hours. Webb out. The screen went dark. Vexithari looked up to find every counselor staring at him. You contacted the humans without council authorization? Ambassador Krill asked. I contacted the humans because they're the only ones who might be able to save those hostages. Vexithari replied firmly. Would anyone else here like to volunteer their forces for this mission? No? Then I suggest we wait to see what the humans propose. 46 hours later, Vexithari received a transmission from Earth. The mission plan was detailed, precise and absolutely insane by galactic standards. It called for a team of 30 Special Forces operators to infiltrate the planet, penetrate the fortress, rescue the hostages, and extract before the Catharan could respond. 30 soldiers against 50,000, and the humans thought it was doable. The team assembled at a classified human military base. Commander Jake Morrison led the operation. He was a Navy SEAL with 15 years of experience and a reputation for completing missions that others wouldn't even attempt. His call sign was Reaper, though he preferred people use his actual name. Major Yuki Tanaka was Delta Force, a tactical genius who could analyze enemy patterns and find weaknesses in any defense. She had grown up in Tokyo, joined the Japanese military, then transferred to American Special Forces through an exchange program. She spoke 7 languages and could hack any computer system in the galaxy. Captain Dmitry Volkov came from Russian Spetsnaz. He was a demolitions expert who could make explosives from almost anything. His file said he once collapsed an entire enemy bunker complex using materials he found in a farming supply store. Lieutenant Sarah Okonkwo was British SAS, a sniper with over 300 confirmed kills. She had once held a defensive position alone for 6 hours against an entire enemy company, picking off any soldier who tried to advance. She was quiet, precise, and absolutely lethal. The team also included operators from France, Germany, South Korea, Canada, Brazil, and a dozen other nations. They represented humanity's best warriors from around the world, now united for a single purpose. Morrison stood before his team in the briefing room. Everyone's read the mission file. I'm not going to sugarcoat this. It's a nightmare scenario. Heavy defenses, overwhelming enemy numbers, hostile environment, and 2,000 lives depending on us. He paused, looking at each operator. It's exactly the kind of mission we train for. What's the estimated casualty rate? Asked a German KSK operator. 80 to 90% if we do this by the book, Morrison replied honestly. So we're not doing it by the book. We're going to do what humans do best. We're going to adapt, improvise, and complete the mission no matter what. Major Tanaka pulled up holographic schematics of the Catharon fortress. I've been analyzing their security patterns. The Catharon are powerful, but they're predictable. They rely on overwhelming force and standard defensive doctrine. They've never faced an enemy that uses psychological warfare, misdirection, and asymmetric tactics the way we do. In other words, Volkov said with a slight smile, they've never fought humans before. Exactly, Tanaka confirmed. They're expecting a frontal assault or a long siege. They're not expecting 30 operators to infiltrate their fortress and extract 2,000 hostages from under their noses. Lieutenant Okonkwo studied the fortress layout. Entry points? Sewer systems, Tanaka replied. The Catharon have biological differences that make them insensitive to certain chemical compounds. Their waste management systems will be minimally guarded. We're going in through the toilets, a French operator asked. We're going in through whatever opening gives us the best chance of success, Morrison said firmly. Remember, mission success isn't about glory or pride. It's about bringing those hostages home alive. The team spent the next 40 hours planning every detail. They studied Catharon psychology, tactics, and technology. They practiced insertions, extractions, and contingencies. They ran simulations until they could execute the mission in their sleep. Bexathari watched some of the preparation through video feeds Admiral Webb provided. He saw humans practicing movements in full gravity suits, simulating the conditions they'd face on the Ilithani homeworld. He saw them practicing communication with the Ilithani hostages, learning key phrases in their language. He saw weapons being tested, equipment being calibrated, and plans being refined. What struck him most was the attitude. These humans knew they were attempting something nearly impossible. They knew the odds were terrible. But there was no hesitation, no doubt. They approached the mission with professional determination and absolute confidence. On the day of departure, Morrison's team boarded stealth dropships designed for deep penetration missions. The ships were small, fast, and almost impossible to detect. They would carry the operators through. The stealth dropships entered Ilithani space without detection. The Catharon defensive network was impressive, covering orbital approaches with overlapping sensor fields and weapon platforms. But the Catharon had never encountered human stealth technology, which combined radar-absorbing materials, heat dispersion systems, and electronic countermeasures into something nearly invisible. Commander Morrison watched the tactical display as they descended toward the planet's surface. The Ilithani homeworld had been beautiful once, covered in cities that looked like art installations and forests that the natives had carefully preserved. Now Catharon military installations scarred the landscape like wounds. 2 minutes to landing zone, the pilot announced. Morrison switched to the team channel. Final equipment check. We go dark the moment we hit ground. No electronic communications once we're inside Catharon jamming range. Hand signals in short range only. The team responded with quiet confirmations. 30 operators, each carrying enough weapons and equipment to fight a small war, each trained to operate independently if necessary. But they weren't planning to fight a war. They were planning to be ghosts. The dropships landed in a forested area 15 kilometers from the fortress. The moment the ramps dropped, the operators disappeared into the shadows. Within 30 seconds, the dropships were airborne again, vanishing into the night sky. On the ground, there was no sign anyone had ever been there. Morrison led his team through the forest using night vision equipment. The Catharon had patrols, but they followed predictable patterns. Tanaka had mapped those patterns during mission planning, identifying windows when the operators could move undetected. They reached the fortress perimeter 3 hours later. The structure loomed above them, a massive complex of dark metal and harsh angles. Lights blazed from guard towers, and Catharan soldiers patrolled in groups of 5. Entry point is 200 meters east, Tanaka whispered, her voice barely audible even to the operators next to her. Waste management access. 4 guards on rotation, change every 6 hours. Next changes in 40 minutes. Morrison nodded. They moved into position, settling into hides where they could observe the guards without being seen. The Catharan were big, nearly 8 feet tall with thick armor-plated skin. They carried heavy weapons and moved with the confidence of soldiers who had never lost a battle. They were about to face an enemy they didn't understand. Lieutenant Okonkwo assembled her sniper rifle with practiced ease. She was positioned 300 meters from the guard post, concealed in the ruins of what had been an Ilithani art gallery. Through her scope, she could see every detail of the Catharan guards' faces. "On your mark, Commander," she whispered into her short-range communicator. Morrison waited. Timing was everything. Too early and they'd alert the fortress. Too late and they'd miss their window. He watched the pattern, counting seconds, waiting for the perfect moment. "Execute," he said quietly. Okonkwo fired 4 times in less than 3 seconds. Each shot was perfectly silent, the weapon modified to eliminate sound and muzzle flash. 4 Catharan guards dropped where they stood, killed instantly by rounds that penetrated their skulls through the small weak points Tanaka had identified in their biology. Morrison's team moved. They crossed the 200 meters in less than a minute, reached the bodies and dragged them into concealment. By the time the next patrol came by, there was no evidence anything had happened. The waste management access was exactly where Tanaka said it would be. Volkov placed shaped charges on the lock, small explosives designed to cut through metal without creating noise or flash. The door opened silently. "Welcome to the sewers," Morrison said. "Let's go save some lives." The team descended into darkness. In the Galactic Council chamber, Vexithari watched the tactical display with growing anxiety. The display showed the operator's last known position, but it hadn't updated in hours. As soon as they entered Catharan jamming range, all communication had ceased. "No contact?" Ambassador Krill asked. "No contact," Vexithari confirmed. "They're operating blind now. We won't know if they've succeeded or failed until it's over." "This is madness," Korath muttered. 30 soldiers cannot defeat 50,000. "They're not trying to defeat them," Vexithari replied. "They're trying to avoid them." Inside the fortress, Morrison's team moved through maintenance tunnels that the Catharan barely monitored. The aliens were supremely confident in their fortress's defenses, never imagining enemies could penetrate this deep without detection. That confidence was their weakness. Tanaka accessed a maintenance terminal and began hacking into the fortress systems. Her fingers moved across the holographic interface with practiced speed, exploiting vulnerabilities in the Catharan security protocols. Within minutes, she had access to internal sensors and cameras. "I have eyes," she whispered, mapping hostage locations now. The fortress was massive, designed to hold 10,000 prisoners. The 2,000 Ilithani were concentrated in the central detention block, exactly where intelligence had predicted, but there was a problem. "Commander," Tanaka said, her voice tight, "Catharan troop concentration around the detention block has tripled." "They know something's happening," Morrison cursed silently. Somehow the Catharan had detected the breach. Maybe they'd found the dead guards. Maybe their sensors picked up something. It didn't matter. The mission just got harder. "Options?" he asked. Tanaka pulled up the fortress schematics. "They're funneling troops toward the detention block. If we try a direct assault, we'll be outnumbered 1,000 to 1. Then we don't assault directly," Morrison decided. "We make them think we're everywhere at once. We turn their fortress into chaos." He split the team into 6 5-person units, each with a specific target. One team would hit the power grid, another would sabotage the communication array, a third would target the vehicle depot, the fourth would strike the command center, the fifth would take out the fortress's defensive cannons, and Morrison's team would go for the hostages. "We hit everything simultaneously," Morrison explained. "Make them think they're facing a battalion, not 30 operators. Keep them confused, keep them reacting, and by the time they figure out what's really happening, we're gone." The teams moved into position. Volkov planted explosives throughout the fortress's infrastructure, shaped charges designed to cause maximum disruption with minimal collateral damage. Okonkwo positioned herself in a maintenance shaft that gave her sight lines to the command center. Other operators prepared breaching charges, smoke grenades, and flashbangs. Morrison checked his chronometer. Execute in 3-2-1 mark. The fortress erupted in chaos. Volkov's charges detonated across the power grid, plunging entire sections into darkness. The Catharan backup generators kicked in, but by then Tanaka had already corrupted their distribution systems. Lights flickered randomly throughout the fortress. Okonkwo opened fire on the command center, her rounds punching through windows and eliminating Catharan officers with surgical precision. Without their commanders, Catharan troops fell back on training and began fortifying positions, exactly as Morrison had predicted. The communication array exploded in a shower of sparks, cutting the fortress off from outside reinforcements. The vehicle depot's fuel storage went up in flames, destroying their rapid response capability. The defensive cannons pivoted wildly as Tanaka fed false targeting data into their systems. And in the confusion, Morrison's team reached the detention block. The problem was immediately obvious. 5,000 Catharan soldiers surrounded the building, dug in and ready for an assault. The fortress's commander, General Vrath, had anticipated a rescue attempt and prepared accordingly. Vrath's voice boomed through loudspeakers across the fortress. Human soldiers, yes, we know you're here. We detected your infiltration 30 minutes ago. You're trapped, surrounded, outnumbered. Surrender now, or I will execute 10 Ilithani hostages every minute until you do. Morrison felt his team tense. They were running out of time and options. 5,000 troops were too many to fight through, even with surprise and superior training. But Morrison hadn't become a commander by giving up when things looked impossible. Tanaka, he said calmly, can you take control of the fortress's internal security systems? Already done, Tanaka replied. I'm locked out of some systems, but I have access to environmental controls, door locks, and automated defenses. Volkov, how many shaped charges do you have left? 12 plus enough materials to make 20 more if I have 10 minutes. Okonkwo, how's your ammunition? 400 rounds remaining. I can hold any position you need, Morrison smiled. His team was asking the right question, not whether they could complete the mission, but how they would complete it. Here's the plan, Morrison said. We're going to do something the Catharan have never seen before. We're going to use their fortress against them. He laid out the plan quickly, efficiently. It was insane. It was brilliant. It was the kind of thinking that made human special forces the most feared warriors in the galaxy. We attack in 5 minutes, Morrison concluded. Remember, the mission is those hostages. Nothing else matters. We get them out or we die trying. One of the operators, a young Marine from Canada, spoke up. Commander, what if we can't get them all out? Morrison's expression hardened. That's not an option. We're special forces. We don't believe in impossible. We brought those people. The assault was poetry written in violence and precision. Morrison's team moved through the fortress like ghosts made real. They used the chaos Tanaka had created, striking from unexpected angles and disappearing before the Catharan could respond effectively. The aliens were powerful warriors, but they had never faced an enemy that treated warfare as both art and science. Volkov's demolitions created a symphony of destruction. Charges detonated in carefully timed sequences, collapsing corridors behind the Catharan troops and cutting off their retreat. Support pillars were weakened, not destroyed, causing sections of the fortress to shift and groan ominously. The Catharan, accustomed to overwhelming force, found themselves fighting on unstable ground against enemies they couldn't see. Lieutenant Okonkwo had positioned herself in a central shaft that gave her sight lines to multiple areas. Her rifle spoke in quiet whispers, and Catharan officers fell. She prioritized targets with ruthless efficiency. First the commanders trying to organize defenses, then the communications specialists trying to call for help, then anyone who looked like they might be rallying troops. Without leadership, the Catharan fell back on individual training, which made them predictable. Tanaka anticipated their movements and locked doors in their faces, opened others to funnel them into kill zones, and manipulated environmental systems to blind them with smoke or freeze them with sudden temperature drops. But the real brilliance of Morrison's plan wasn't the chaos. It was the focus. While 5 teams created havoc throughout the fortress, Morrison's team went straight for the detention block. The Catharan had concentrated their forces there, expecting a frontal assault. What they got was something else entirely. Morrison led his team through maintenance crawl spaces too small for the massive Catharan to follow. They emerged inside the detention block itself, behind the enemy lines. The Ilithani hostages were locked in cells designed for psychological torture, small, dark, isolated. The humans moved from cell to cell, using electronic lockpicks to open doors silently. "Stay calm," Morrison told each group of hostages in their language. "We're human special forces. We're here to take you home. Follow our instructions exactly and we'll get you out safely." The Ilithani were terrified, emaciated, traumatized by months of captivity. But they saw something in these small, determined aliens that gave them hope. They nodded and followed. Meanwhile, General Vrath realized something had gone terribly wrong. His fortress was tearing itself apart from the inside. His troops were scattered, confused, fighting shadows. And when he checked the detention block cameras, he saw something that made his blood run cold. The hostages were gone. "All units, converge on the detention block," Vrath roared. "Kill the humans, recapture the prisoners." But it was already too late. Morrison's team had moved 2,000 Ilithani through the maintenance tunnels, using routes the Catharan didn't even know existed. Tanaka had mapped every crawl space, every maintenance shaft, every forgotten corner of the fortress during her hack of the security systems. Now those maps guided them through the darkness, moving 2,000 frightened civilians past 5,000 enemy soldiers without a single encounter. The other teams maintained pressure, keeping the Catharan focused elsewhere. Explosions continued. Gunfire echoed through corridors. Automated defenses fired randomly. The fortress had become a maze of death where the Catharan were the ones being hunted. Volkov set his final charges, massive explosives placed at key structural points. "Commander, I'm ready to bring down the eastern section whenever you give the word." "Not yet," Morrison replied. "We need to buy more time." Time was the enemy now. They had the hostages, but they were still deep inside enemy territory, with no way to call for extraction. The stealth dropships wouldn't approach until they received the all-clear signal, and they couldn't send that signal until they were clear of the Catharan jamming fields. Morrison made a decision that only a special forces operator would consider. "We're going to walk out the front door." His team stared at him. One operator finally spoke. "Sir, that's insane." "Yes," Morrison agreed. "Which is why it might work," he explained quickly. The Catharan expected them to flee, to hide, to sneak away. They would never expect the humans to simply march 2,000 hostages through the main gate. It was audacious to the point of absurdity. It was exactly the kind of plan that might work. Tanaka manipulated the fortress systems one final time. She opened the main gates, shut down the defensive turrets facing outward, and created a corridor of chaos everywhere else. Then she triggered fire alarms throughout the fortress, causing automated evacuation protocols to activate. In the confusion, Morrison's team walked 2,000 Ilithani hostages through the main gate of the Catharan fortress. They moved in formation, operators surrounding the civilians, weapons ready. They looked like they owned the place. A Catharan patrol saw them and moved to intercept. Okonkwo dropped the squad leader with a perfect headshot from 800 meters away. The rest of the patrol scattered, unwilling to push forward without leadership. They walked for 15 minutes before General Vrath realized what had happened. His roar of rage echoed through the fortress. He personally led 5,000 soldiers in pursuit. "Now, Volkov," Morrison said calmly. Volkov triggered his charges. The eastern section of the fortress collapsed in a controlled demolition that would have made any engineer proud. Tons of metal and concrete fell, blocking the main exit and trapping the Catharan forces inside their own stronghold. Morrison's team reached the forest line and activated their emergency beacon. The stealth dropships appeared within minutes, landing in a clearing where the operators had guided the hostages. Loading 2,000 civilians onto dropships designed for 30 operators took time they didn't have. The Catharan were already working to clear the rubble blocking their path. Morrison could hear the sound of heavy equipment and angry shouts. "Double time," Morrison called out. "Everyone moves, no one left behind." The operators helped elderly Ilithani onto ships, carried injured civilians, coordinated the loading with military precision. They were exhausted, running on adrenaline and determination, but they never stopped moving. The last Ilithani was boarding when Catharan soldiers burst from the tree line. Morrison's rear guard opened fire, laying down suppressing fire that forced the Catharan to take cover. The operators retreated by sections, each team covering the others as they fell back to the ships. Morrison was the last human aboard. He sprinted up the ramp as Catharan rounds sparked off the hull around him. The ramp closed and the dropship lifted off, engines screaming as it accelerated away from the enemy fire. Inside the ship, Morrison did a quick head count. 30 operators, 2,000 Ilithani. Everyone was accounted for. Casualties? He asked. 3 wounded, none critical, his medic reported. We got lucky, Commander. Morrison smiled tiredly. Luck had nothing to do with it. That was skill, training, and good planning. He activated his communicator. All teams report status. One by one, the teams checked in. Every operator was accounted for. Every hostage was safe. Against impossible odds, against a fortress designed to be impenetrable, 30 human Special Forces operators had completed a perfect rescue. The mission had taken 6 hours and 32 minutes. In the Galactic Council chamber, the tactical display updated as the human ships escaped Catharan territory. Vexithari watched the data stream in, barely believing what he was seeing. All hostages recovered, he announced, his voice shaking slightly. All human operators alive. Mission complete, the chamber erupted. Counselors who had declared the mission impossible demanded to see the footage. Ambassador Krill's crystalline form pulsed with colors that indicated shock and awe. Even Fleet Admiral Korath, who had predicted 70% casualties, sat in stunned silence over the next hours. As the human ships returned to friendly space, Morrison transmitted his after-action report along with footage from the operators' helmet cameras. The Galactic Council watched in amazement as 30 soldiers accomplished what their best military minds had called impossible. They watched human operators move through the fortress like predators, each movement purposeful and precise. They watched Tanaka turn the Catharan's own fortress against them. They watched Volkov create explosions that defied the laws of probability. They watched Okonkwo eliminate targets from distances that should have been impossible. And they watched Morrison lead his team and 2,000 hostages through enemy territory with absolute confidence. How? Ambassador Krill finally asked. How did they do this? Vexithari, who had studied humans more than any other counselor, stood to address the chamber. Because we've been asking the wrong question. We've been asking how human special forces can do the impossible. The real question is, why do they consider it possible at all? He pulled up files on human military training. Human regular forces are trained to be adaptive, resilient, and mission-focused. They're taught that retreat is a tactical decision, not a defeat. They're conditioned to operate under extreme stress and continue fighting when other species would surrender. The display shifted to show Special Forces training footage. Human Special Forces take that found to tie